Welcome to the Recovery Effect Podcast with Bill Vineyard. Recovery is Bill's passion and his life's work of 30 plus years. Now it's your turn to experience the Recovery Effect, a powerful mix of recovery, spirituality, philosophy, and most importantly, living life as your true self. Now here's your host, Bill Vineyard.
Can you remember a time in your life when you really wanted to change? When things were just falling apart and you tried every conceivable way of changing, but only to find yourself back in the same situation you just got out of? Have you ever looked up into your loved one's eyes after you just promised them a week ago that everything was going to be different, and they look at you with disgust and anger because they feel that you failed them? That you went back on your word after you promised them over and over that this would never happen again? Do you ever look back and just categorize how many different attempts that you have made at trying to change? Did you find the right job or the right girl or the right guy? Have the right amount of money? Go to church, not go to church? Get a stressful job, get a less stressful job? All these things that we tried to do in order to facilitate change, but here we are sitting here, complete failures, completely washed up, people not wanting anything to do with us. Families have either left or have withdrawn, and we just sit there, and the single most important thing that we want in our life at that point is to be able to change. I know people who's tried that and failed so many times that they've literally told me that they're not going to try anymore. They just can't change. It's heartbreaking to see these people suffer and their families suffer because of their inability to change. Isn't that strange, or don't you find that somewhat strange? Even when the will and the desire to change is there, a lot of us can't do it. That ought to blow your mind a little bit. Of course, we in the program know that we're powerless over alcohol and drugs and our life is unmanageable. We know that we can't stop drinking on our own. Therefore, we're somewhat aware that there are some things that we're powerless over when it comes to change. Let me give you an example. Take a moment and just imagine the food that you hate the most, the one that when they set it in front of you just disgusts you. Now let's pretend that I have a machine, and this machine is totally perfect in reading if you hate something or love something. Let's say that I hook you up to that machine, and I put that plate of nasty food that you hate in front of you, and I offer you $100,000 if you could love that food. Now, you might pretend to love it, you'd even eat it. But my machine would no doubt register that you hate this food. You couldn't even change your will to love that food for $100,000. Even if I put a gun to your head and your life depended on you changing enough to love that food, you couldn't do it. Now, if you can't do that, what makes you think that you can change on your own enough to stay sober and clean and be a good father, a good mother, good son, good daughter? You can't. That's the point. In this podcast, we're going to figure out how to overcome this deficit and find a way that we can change at least sufficiently enough to stay sober and clean and be a good person. You know, we could say that we are our principles, meaning that who we are is based on the principles that we have adopted and brought into our life, the principles that we live by. Whether these principles are good or evil, it's still who we are. Because principles guide our life. Principles tell us who we are. Our behavior is based upon these principles. Sometime in our life, we made a decision to be the kind of person we wanted to be. And once we figured that out, then all we had to do was figure out what principles applies to this person, what principles make this person who they are, and then we just duplicate that and adopt those principles, and we'll become that person that we chose to be. I remember one time I gave this talk in a group setting, and after the talk, I had a guy come up to me, and he told me, he said, "You know, Bill, you're absolutely right. I remember when I was 12 years old," he said, "we were going on vacation, and we was riding in the van, and all of a sudden I looked out to the right side of the van where I was sitting, and these Hell's Angels rode by on their motorcycles. When I looked at that, it looked so free and so happy. I thought to myself, that's what I want to be when I grow up." And he said, "You know, I spent the rest of my life becoming that." and I adopted every principle those Hell's Angels had, and before you know it, I was a Hell's Angel. Of course, you know that wasn't his true self. That was just his stage self, his theatrical character that he chose to make up and be. What I'm trying to tell you is that he had to adopt those Hell's Angel principles in order to become this person. Therefore, he is his principles. It really doesn't matter what you decide you want to create, what you want to become, because we end up submitting our life and will to these principles because we know that by complete surrender to these principles, we'll obtain our goal. Whether that goal is a Hell's Angel, a monk, a doctor, a cowboy, a mother, or a father, even if the character you wanted to develop was good or bad, is irrelevant. What I'm trying to point out here, folks, is the most important thing I think in this podcast for you to stick with, which is the foundation of this podcast, and that is you are your principles. What principles you chose to adopt for your stage character, this theatrical character you're going to play, is what you base your decisions on what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. It's all based on those principles that you chose to adopt. But please remember, you chose who you wanted to be. You chose this character. Even though this character is not real, it's a stage character, you still chose it. You said, this is what I want to be. I don't want to be me. I want to be this guy or this girl. By choosing these principles, you're now able to develop your character, the character you have, the type of character that we consider that internal self. When people look at you, they say, this is a man or woman of character, or this is his kind of character, or he's got bad character or good character. What I'm trying to say is that these principles that we adopt develop this character, this internal self character that you are. You develop this character based on the decision of the person you wanted to become. This character controls your will, your behavior. You can't be better than your character. Character is critical. So you have these principles that you've adopted. You take these principles and you form your character based on them principles. And once you've got your character formed, it is what it is. You can't be better than this character. I mean, once in a while you'll do things out of character, but in general, you can only be what your character is. In other words, you can't be a generous person if your character is selfish. You can't be a hard worker if your character is lazy. I mean, that just isn't going to happen. I don't care how much cognitive behavioral therapy you go through. I don't care how much medication you take. Until that character changes, you are what you are, and you're going to do what you do. That's just the way it is, folks. How can a dishonest, lying person be honest? It's not going to happen. Once in a while, people do things out of character. I know one time I was in church and this monk from Africa or some country over there were taking care of starving children, and he showed slides of this, and I got so emotional that when they passed the basket to help this guy's ministry, I put in a big old fat check. Well, after I did that and the service was over, I was walking to my car in the parking lot, and I said, man, why did I do that? I didn't want to give that much money. I wonder how I can get that check back. You see, what happened is I did something out of character. I wasn't that generous of a person. I mean, I was going to give him a reasonable amount of money, but I did something out of character. That happens once in a while, but in general, your character is what it is. You're your character based on the principles that you've adopted to develop that character. And again, don't forget, your character determines the quality of your will. Whether you have a high, good quality will or a low, bad quality will. Your character determines that will, and of course your will determines your behavior because the will chooses what actions it wants to take in order to get what it wants. So you can see how very important the decision you made on who to become, which caused you to adopt the principles to become that, which those principles developed your character, which determine the quality of your will, is going to determine the choices that you make in your life and the results you're going to have because of those choices. Now that we've laid this foundation, let's take a look at this. Recovery from alcohol and drugs is well known that it is a spiritual recovery. What else has worked? Think about it. Nothing else has succeeded like this 12-step program because it's based on spiritual what? Spiritual principles. I mean, look, the 12-step program has put Skid Row people back to work in our communities. I have seen hardened criminals, career criminals, become honest people. Who else has done that? I challenge anyone to tell me who else has done that. Who has done that without spiritual principles? No one. There's been little teeny pockets of success here and there, maybe in psychotherapy or medication or whatever they're using, but I'm telling you, overall, they are total failures. Medication, psychotherapy, all this junk has never worked. It's not working now, and it never will work. But where you do see success, some good success, is when you look at a program that has spiritual principles. It has made bad mothers into good mothers, bad fathers into good fathers. It's an incredible experience to see people who were hardened core criminals or just bad people get into a spiritual program and change to such an extent that they're no longer the people that they were. How beautiful is that? This is why you hear me harping on the failure of medication and psychotherapy to produce results, because so many people are going down that path and are failing, and they think it's their fault. They think that they can't make it because they've tried psychotherapy or they've tried medication, and therefore when they continue to fail time and time again, they're starting to feel hopeless when they really haven't been introduced to the right stuff that would help them succeed. A program based on spiritual principles, a life based on living by those principles. But after numerous treatments, alcoholics and drug addicts feel that they're a failure and that they'll never recover. They lose all hope, and it simply boils down to the fact that they have not been offered the right kind of help. But in reality, in essence, the buck stops with you and your choice. The good news is that you can make another choice. If you have chosen to be a Hell's Angel or a Scarface or a doctor or a cowboy, all those are fictitious characters. All of those you've adopted the principles to develop your character that controls your will. That's by choice. The good news is you can make another choice. If you do it, it will require that you adopt spiritual principles. And this is an act of will or desire, which means that after you've made another choice to become basically who you are, which is your real self, now it's an act of will to adopt the spiritual principles into your life. Now it's a desire. If you've completed steps 1 through 7, you should have a desire for spiritual principles. You should have a desire to be a better person and live a better life. So after you make this choice, now it's down to your willing those spiritual principles and desiring them at the same time. Now look how cool this is. Once you start adopting these spiritual principles that develop your character, at the same time you're getting rid of character defects. You're getting rid of the old character defects, and at the same time you're bringing in these good spiritual principles. Man, what a way to go. Pretty soon that character is back in good shape. Now you have to know and have to remember that this cannot be done without a relationship with God, the God of your understanding. Everything hinges on your relationship with God. This can't be done without it. And you will not have a relationship with God until you realize you need Him, until you realize your powerlessness. Whether it's over alcohol or drugs or just living life on life's terms, your relationship with God will not occur until you realize how bad you need Him. So realizing you're powerless is paramount. And you know what? I bet we will not admit powerlessness until we hit bottom and surrender, until we've had enough, until the pain is so great that we can't go on with this way of living. Then we'll admit powerlessness, then we'll hit bottom and surrender, then we'll make another choice, then we'll adopt the principles that go along with that choice, and we'll develop the character which determines the will. This is good stuff, folks. I hope you're putting this together. I hope I'm saying it in such a way that you can put it together, because I feel this information is paramount in your recovery and living your life. I mean, the big book says in the 3rd step that we were reborn In other words, you give up that person that you chose to be, and you, so to speak, are reborn to this person you was all the time. This real self. You created it, therefore you gave birth to it, to this false self. And now, after you created it and gave birth to it, you have to be reborn back into your real self. Man, that's good stuff, folks. And a lot of this is an act of desire, a desire to be better. And it's also an act of will, to be willing to do whatever it takes. But see, if you don't have a desire to be a better person, if there's something in you that doesn't desire that, you're not going to go through what it takes to get there, what it takes to be a better person. As for myself, ever since I got into recovery, found a God of my understanding, I've always had a desire to be a better person. That's why I read so much and do all these other things. And I fail in a lot of my things, but the desire has never left me, ever left me, to be a better person. Therefore, I will things that make me better. I make myself read books. I make myself pray. I will these things in my life. Why? Because I have a desire to be a better person. I hope you have that desire. And if you don't, I hope you go find it. But I can tell you, the best place to do it is the working of these spiritual 12 steps. They take care of everything we've talked about. Not a treatment center step you need to work, but the 12 steps. Not a counselor, but a sponsor. Not a peer mentor, but the friends you meet in AA or NA or CA. Not psychotherapy, but spiritual therapy. Yes, this thing works. This thing right here can take you where you want to go, if you want to go there. If you have the desire to be a better person, if you're willing to go to any length to be that, you have got the right vehicle right in front of you. All you have to do is pick up those tools, turn on that ignition, and take off. If you can't find the right help or the right person, email me. Email me at therecoveryeffect.com, and let's get to going with this. Let's get the car on the right track, going down the right road, doing the right thing so we can get to our destination as quickly as possible. This is the vehicle that will get us there. I assure you it is. Don't doubt that. I'm excited for you folks to realize that you want to become this kind of a person, the person that you really are, and that there's these principles that will get you there. And I'm excited that you have a desire for these principles, and you're going to take those principles and you're going to adopt them in your life. You're going to say yes to those principles. And then you know what you're going to do? You're going to practice these principles in all your affairs, and you watch your life change. How could it not change? How could it be any different but that your life does change and change for the better? Don't be the half-measure people who claims to accept a God but does not want to accept the principles of God, who claims that they're a member of the 12-step program, but they won't practice, nor will they accept the principles of that program. In other words, what they want is they want God and sobriety at Walmart prices. They want their cake and eat it too. They want to hold on to negative and hurtful principles and yet stay sober and clean and have a relationship with God. It ain't going to happen, period. It ain't going to happen. It's time to let go, absolutely, and accept the beautiful opportunity that God is laying at your feet right now. Thank you for listening to this podcast and allowing me to be part of your life. That means a great deal to me. So until next time, goodbye, and keep trudging the road of happy destiny by practicing these principles in all your affairs. I would like to say something before I'm off this podcast, and that is, if you're listening to this and you haven't subscribed yet, I would really appreciate it if you'd go over there to therecoveryeffects.com and subscribe. Put your email down on there so I can send one out directly to you each time. This is really important to me, and it helps keep this podcast going, because without subscribers, there won't be a podcast. So, if you're listening to this and you haven't subscribed to it, please take the time to do it.
Thanks for listening to The Recovery Effect with Bill Vineyard. Check out more at therecoveryeffect.com and facebook.com/therecoveryeffect. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes.